I'm absolutely delighted to introduce veteran cultural critic Bruce Handy to the store this evening. Handy is a contributing editor at Vanity Fair magazine and a former writer and editor at Spy and Time magazines. He has also contributed journalism, essays, criticism, and humor to the New York Times magazine, The New Yorker, Esquire, and many other publications. Handy lives in Manhattan with his wife, novelist Helen Schulman, and their two children. Wild Things, The Joy of Reading Children's Literature as an Adult is his first book. In the introduction to Wild Things, Handy writes, "It should go without saying that the best children's literature is every bit as rich and rewarding in its concerns, as honest and stylish in execution as the best adult literature, and also as complicated, stubborn, conflicted, and mysterious." As someone who spends her days reading, talking, and selling books for children, I'm here to tell you that Bruce Handy speaks the truth. Handy offers an engaging, witty, and personal exploration and appreciation of reading and rereading children's literature as an adult. Along the way, he also offers some awesome literary tidbits. Who knew that Dr. Seuss also worked on the screenplay for Rebel Without a Cause, and that L. Frank Baum's first publication was a guide to breeding Hamburg chickens? In addition, he provides some outstanding social commentary as he covers writers ranging from Margaret Wise Brown to Beatrix Potter to Laura Ingalls Wilder and Maurice Sendak. Please join me in welcoming Bruce Handy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming. I'm so grateful to Margaret and Politics and Prose for having me. I think I'm probably, speaking to the, preaching to the choir or whatever the cliche is here. But I think, I don't know. I love being in bookstores right now because I don't think, I don't think books have ever been more important than they are right now. I'm sure everybody agrees. Also, I forgot. I usually have this shtick where I go down to the downstairs, in this case, to the children's section, pick up a couple like just brand new but amazing picture books at random, just to kind of show off what an amazing sort of golden age of picture books we're living in, which I think is 100% true. Well, what I was going to say is I think you after. Also, I presume not only do you care about books because you're here, I presume, except for like the people who are here just here because they're my friends, but the rest of you, I still have some interest in children's literature. So I really urge you. I mean, it's something I like to do. Anytime I'm at a bookstore, I go into the children's section. I just look around at at just what are the new picture books, and I swear there's almost always like one or two that just like kind of knock my socks off. I'm going to read a little bit and then take questions. I guess I'll just briefly introduce the book a little bit more. It kind of came out of having children and reading to children, my children, in fact, who are now actually, it's funny, ironically, because I sort of wrote, in some ways, I kind of wrote this book on their backs, but literally like 2 days after this published in August, I have two children, a daughter and a son. My son is my youngest, went off to college, so it was like literally became published a book on my children's backs, and then became an empty nester. So there's some kind of weird, I don't know, irony or cosmic something or other and all that. But yeah, it really came out of like most parents. I read to the kids every night, but at some point I kind of started realizing that it was more. I was kind of, and my kids would say this to you too, that in some ways I was more reading for myself than for them. I started getting so caught up in these books, and somebody who's been a pretty passionate reader my whole life, and also just a film goer and a music listener and all that kind of stuff. I just started kind of thinking about these books the way I would think about any kind of art that I like, that's interesting. And a real seminal experience for me was when our daughter was born. I think we got like literally 5 or 6 copies of Goodnight Moon, which like everybody does. That was a book because I'm 59, and when I was a kid in the 60s, that book it was in print, but it wasn't really it wasn't ubiquitous the way it is today. I think that really started in the 70s, maybe even in the 80s. I'm pretty sure Goodnight Moon was one of the first board books, and that's really what kind of caused it to explode. But anyway, so like, okay, I sort of heard of it, and I'm reading it, and it's sort of sweet. But the more I looked at it, the more it was, I thought really kind of profound in a way. I mean, what I think is so great about that book and so many of the books by Margaret Wise Brown, who wrote it, and Clement Hurd is the illustrator, is that it really gets into a kid's mindset, especially in this, a very young kid, maybe almost, close to a pre-verbal kid. I mean, I think, there's something so profound even just about the opening line where she says, "In the great green room," which, if you're a little kid, I mean, your little bedroom is huge and great and this vast area to explore. And that's kind of what the book does. It sort of explores what's in the room. And also I think that, the idea for a child that young, the idea of naming things, the idea of possessions, all this stuff is very important. So, the more I read this, I thought, wow, there's really, there's more going on here than just kind of a pleasant night story with a cute little bunny and a mouse and, old lady whispering hush or whatever. And, and somebody had also given us the Runaway Bunny, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in this excerpt. And it was like, oh, wait, these are both written by the same person. And you start to, it was interesting. I started, then I started following, children's books authors the way, follow any kind of, you read a novel you like, and then you want to see what else the person has written. So, I don't know if you know much about Margaret Wise Brown, but I think she published like close to 60 books in her lifetime, and she left tons of unfinished and unpublished manuscripts, and they keep cranking them out. And they're all mostly good. I mean, there's actually one, they just published one this summer, which I think is kind of, but, I mean, it's like, after like probably close to 90 books now, you're allowed to start scraping the bottom of the barrel. Anyway, so that's kind of what led to this. I just found I enjoyed thinking and writing about children's books, and kind of long story short, that's what led to this book. It's kind of organized. The first chapter actually is mostly about Margaret Wise Brown and some other authors for the very young, including like Eric Carle and Jack Ezra Keats, who did The Snowy Day, which is another amazing masterpiece. And then it kind of goes on, and there's there's a chapter about animal books, which I think are in some ways how kids books and stories that kind of tell kids a little bit about start telling them about the outside world and how society works and how nature works. Sometimes how nature mirrors society and vice versa. Fairy tales, which I think are more about an interior world and conflicts kids have, and and so on and so on. I did a chapter about quote unquote girl books that many boys, at least in my generation, never read, like the like Little Women and the Little House books, and Judy Blume, especially Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. All which, well, I don't know. Little Women, I'm a little, but yeah, I mean, the Little House books I found amazing, and Judy Blume is, can't say enough about her. Anyways, and then the book ends with a chapter on kids' books about death, which is mostly an excuse to talk about Charlotte's Web. And there's a parlor trick. If somebody asks me to, like, if you want to ask me if I can read the paragraph about Charlotte dying, I'll actually start crying up here. So I might even start crying, talking about it. Which actually, this is sort of, I found this out after I wrote the book, so I couldn't put it in the book. But there's a wonderful, if you don't know, you should listen to it. An amazing recording of E.B. White, who reading Charlotte's Web himself, and it's incredible. But somebody told me apparently he reading that paragraph where Charlotte dies, I think he had to do 17 takes before he could get through it himself without crying. So when I read the audio version of my book, it took me only 3 takes to get through that. So that's one thing I did better than E.B. White. So this is a chapter called Runaways, and it's about children's books that kind of deal with family and parents, and sometimes the tensions between children and parents. I'm sorry, Nora, there's one bad word. I hope you don't mind. Okay. Portnoy's Complaint isn't a children's book, notoriously not, but it is indisputably a child's book. The novel's very first word is she being the mother of Philip Roth's hero and narrator, Alexander Portnoy. He is on the psychiatrist's couch as the narrative begins, dredging up memories of her. This is Roth now. She was so deeply embedded in my consciousness that for the first year of school, I seemed to have believed that each of my teachers was my mother in disguise. As soon as the last bell had sounded, I would rush off for home, wondering as I ran if I could possibly make it to our apartment before she had succeeded in transforming herself. Invariably, she was already in the kitchen by the time I arrived and setting out my milk and cookies. Instead of causing me to give up my delusions, however, The feat merely intensified my respect for her powers. Sophie Portnoy is not only powerful. Like many omnipotent beings, she is also easily bruised and vengeful. So she makes a habit of banishing young Alex from the family apartment for transgressions so minor their nature is not apparent to the perpetrator himself. She cannot love him anymore, Sophie says. Not a little boy who behaves like you do. Roth doesn't let Alex's figuratively impotent, literally constipated father off the hook, but it is Sophie who dominates both novel and son's psyche to the point that the book reads like an extended primal scream of a Jewish mother joke. And yet, anyone of any ethnicity, religion, or gender should be able to recognize the yin-yang, push-me, pull-you, love-me, let-me go tension between parent and child that Roth vivisects with such anger and glee. Because just as nearly every culture seems to enjoy some version of a fillable pancake, whether crepe, roti, tortilla, or wonton wrapper, so most of us know Sophie Portnoys. Some may be more neglectful than smothering, others more passive-aggressive than aggressive-aggressive, but all, whatever their gender, and this is not a gendered thing, leaving tire treads back and forth across their offspring. As the British poet Philip Larkin famously put it, they fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. I bring up Portnoy's complaint because it reads like an R-rated antithesis of the work I really want to talk about, The Runaway Bunny, which, in its own sunny way, see, I finally did get to kids' book. You thought, what? I came here to hear about kids talking about Philip Roth. The Runaway Bunny, which in its own sunny way is as incisive a treatise on the parent-child bond as Roth's novel. I also bring up Portnoy's complaint to highlight the fact that books for very young children occupy a rare literary preserve where mom and dad don't fuck you up. Sorry, two bad words. It should take but a minute's thought to compile a list of iconic, bad, or at least difficult parents in works for adults. Aside from Mr. and Mrs. Portnoy, I came up with Medea, King Lear, Queen Gertrude, Pap Finn, Mary Tyrone, Mama Rose, Jack Torrance, Troy Maxon, and every single adult in the ice storm. On the other hand, in trying to conjure an equally extensive list of iconic good parents in adult literature, well, off the top of my head, I came up with Atticus Finch and David Copperfield's mother. That the latter is killed off early and the former became a less savory figure following the publication in 2015 of Go Tell a Watchman. It is among picture books for the very young where you have to look far and wide for withholding mothers and fathers with anger issues. There are a few characters I might accuse of sloppy parenting, such as the man in the yellow hat who is so laissez-faire he never realizes that merely admonishing Curious George to be a good monkey and then abandoning him for hours on end will never not prove a recipe for disaster. The mother in The Cat in the Hat is so loopy she leaves her children in the care of a fish. Hers will be the house where all the kids go to smoke weed in high school. But most parents in books for the very young are steady, kind, and dull, less like child services cases and more like presidents in textbooks from the pre-pathography era. Why are the literary scales on the rest of the shelves weighted so heavily toward bad parenting? Tolstoy's line about all happy families being alike is the wrongest literary maxim this side of Fitzgerald's claim that American lives lack second acts, but no one would deny that unhappy families make for better stories. Also, what we need from stories changes as we age. When we are very young, what we need are our parents. When we are older, what we need is to pull away from their gravitational field, or at least to try and maybe kick up a little ruckus. The Runaway Bunny endures in part because it hits a sweet spot between infancy's abject dependency and a toddler's itch to make some actual use of his or her newfound mobility. Anyone who read The Catcher in the Rye or The Outsiders as an adolescent will remember how those books crystallized the conflicting emotions, the yearning for security and the need to rebel, so endemic to that stage of life. Well, The Runaway Bunny serves a similar purpose for the pull-up years. The text begins, once there was a little bunny who wanted to run away. Like most children sniffing at independence, he announces his plan. I am running away. To which his mother responds, if you run away, I will run after you, for you are my little bunny. So begins a lyrical back and forth in which the little bunny insists that if his mother does run after him, he will become a fish and swim away in a stream. And she responds that she will become a fisherman. He then says he will become a rock on a mountain high above you. And she responds that she will become a mountain climber and climb to where you are, and so on. Several pages later, the bunny has become a sailboat being blown homeward by his mother, who is now the wind itself. It is a beautiful image, but also a bit frightening. A parent who has literally become elemental as necessary to life as earth, water, and fire. The story goes on for a few more exchanges, but it's all diminuendo And the bunny finally gives up, assured that he has what he really wants. Shucks, he concedes. I might as well stay where I am and be your little bunny. For the readers to whom the runaway bunny is addressed, this is all very calming. When I said that the mother as wind was a rather frightening idea, I meant for those of us old enough to have already spent our teenage years and young adulthood litigating independence from our parents, and subsequent decades relitigating it. Toddlers, if I may extend the metaphor, only threaten to sue. They might have their lawyers send a nasty letter in the form of a tantrum, but they never follow up. At that age, threats to run away are meant to test the resiliency of the child-parent bond. A more advanced form of peekaboo, a less advanced version of leaving a joint or birth control device where mom or dad can find it. My daughter, when she was 2 or 3, played a game in which she would announce that she was taking a trip, then march off with her baby stroller to the kitchen for 30 seconds or so, then rush back and announce that she was home, then fly across the living room to her mother's arms, laughing with both exhilaration and relief. If you share my uneasy admiration for the Runaway Bunny, you may not be surprised to learn that the book owes its emotional intensity in part to a medieval Provençal love ballad that Brown came across and decided to plunder. The poetry's beautiful pattern might be applied to our ends, Brown wrote to her mentor, Lucy Sprague Mitchell, who was an important figure in children's literature in the 1930s when this was all going on. But Brown borrowed the poem's emotional currents as well. The ballad begins with a demurral. If you pursue me, I shall become a fish in the water, and I shall escape you. The ardent lover responds, if you become a fish, I shall become an eel, and I shall eat you. The initial speaker, the prey, love ballad or no, that seems the right word here, now imagines turning into a fox to escape. The pursuer counters by promising to become a hunter, prompting this final exchange. If you hunt me, I shall be buried deep, deep in the ground, and you will never have my love. And then the response, this is like, I can't believe this is so weird, I can't even believe that I'm reading it. If you are dead, dead and buried, I shall be the dust on your grave, and I will marry you, dead or alive. So yes, the Runaway Bunny evolved from a ballad about obsessive love with an unpleasant ending, one that to 21st century eyes may read like the poem a stalker would leave on his intended's windshield. In a horrible way, though, this is not altogether inappropriate. And I think I'm going to stop there. But rest assured, the rest of it justifies all the stuff about Philip Roth, so you'll have to buy the book and see how I bring it all to like a magnificent and just perfectly tied off conclusion. Anyways, thanks. And I would love to take any questions anybody has. Russell, you have a question. I'm putting you on the spot.
I know that you, at the beginning of the book, you apologized for some of the authors that you left out,
Uh-huh.
and I marginally can forgive you for some of them. What are the ones you really regret leaving out? Because there was a pretty impressive list of ones you couldn't include.
Well, yeah, I think definitely the book certainly. I think that I think there's some contemporary authors I probably should have maybe included. I mean, I think the book, probably a fault of the book is that it's very much. I mean, I'm not. It's not pretending to be comprehensive. It's not even pretending to be like some kind of canon or best of. But it certainly are a lot of the books that that a white middle-aged guy would have kind of encountered in childhood for the most part. And I think I probably it would have been good to include a few more contemporary authors. I don't know. Kevin Henkes is one that comes to mind. If I kept thinking about it, I could think of a bunch of others. I mean, there's definitely people that a lot of it also was where there were things where I felt I just, I was kind of trying to limit it to something I felt I had something interesting or original to say about. I mean, I originally I had intended to write about Harry Potter in a kind of chapter about fantasy, but at some point I just felt that and I think those books are amazing. I'm like grateful that I got to sort of read them with my kids in real time as they came out. It's just like an incredible experience that I just feel so grateful as a reader and a parent. But yeah, I mean they're just so well written about, and when they would come out, Christopher Hitchens would be, I just felt I didn't really have anything to add to the conversation. And there's certainly other authors like that I just felt, I'm not adding anything. Plus, I don't know, the book, I was like 3 years late turning it in anyway, so Harry Potter would have been another 4 years, yeah.
Hi, that was similar to a question I was going to ask. I'm going to ask my other question. As you were making decisions about what books to include and what to discuss about them, what considerations did you address about books that don't necessarily age well for a more modern audience? I'm thinking, for example, of the Little House books, where when you look at the treatment of Native Americans or the references, how do you sort of approach that? I mean, you did this from a perspective of reading this with your children, so you can have those sorts
Yeah.
of conversations. But from an educator's perspective, which is what I'm looking at, how do you continue to encourage that love of literature while also being aware of some of the things that don't age well?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, and I definitely talk, and I talked about that to quite an extent, and I hope ably, and about the Little House books and the treatment of Native Americans. I mean, I think just speaking as a parent, and I couldn't get my kids didn't want to read those books. So I didn't actually have to have those conversations with them. I mean, obviously, it's something every family, every educator, every reader has to decide for him or herself. If the book's treatment of Native American maybe and I know some people really think those books are just sort of out of bounds and shouldn't be read anymore. I think they're great. I think they're worth reading. I think any kid old enough to appreciate them is old enough to understand what's wrong with them. And what's wrong with them isn't really so much what's wrong with the books themselves. It's what's wrong with American history, I think. And kids, that's something kids need to know about. They need to know what their history is. So it's not a bad, reading I think the little, the cliche of a teachable moment, but I think to me, it's a perfect example. Also, I mean, and there are, and I talk about this a little bit. Something I could have talked about more is, there's a wonderful series by Louise Erdrich called the Birch Bark House series, which she wrote partly as a kind of a Native American, response to the Little House books, which in some ways, I mean, that was partly her intent, but that also makes it, I mean, the books themselves are wonderful and shouldn't just be, don't need to be or shouldn't just be seen in the context of the Little House books, but they are. It's similar. It's a story of a Native American family and the things that happened to them, over, sort of. I think it's set a little bit earlier than when Laura Ingalls Wilder was writing about. But I mean, the difference is, they have to keep moving too, but it's not because Paul wants to move stakes. They're forced to move. But they're great. They're great books, and certainly probably if I was. I mean, I don't know. You probably know those books. I mean, if I was teaching Little House, I would certainly also teach teach Birch Bark. I would teach them, I would bring them up in history class too.
So thank you for this book and for
Sure.
your interesting talk. So 2 questions. So looking back over this book, what would you say are your 1 or 2 favorite stories that resonate with you as an adult? And also, it seems to me that somebody once said that Disney movies all have kind of parent loss involved. Is that a theme in children's literature in general?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, because all those Disney, I mean, not all of them, but most of them are, they're based on fairy tales or Bambi is a novel where the mother dies. I mean, that's a big. I think it's people have written about this a lot. Famously brutal Bettelheim, but it's a way for kids to kind of deal with their fears and anxieties, and also sort of the excitement too of kind of venturing out in the world on your own in this kind of exciting vicarious way. I mean, Harry Potter is like a total update on that. He's an orphan. I forget the children in. I mean, it's everywhere. Dorothy has parent figures in the Wizard of Oz, but she's presumably an orphan. I don't think it ever says she's living with her aunt and uncle. The children, the 4 Pevensey family children in the Narnia books, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they're sent off. It's set during the London Blitz, and they're sent off to the country to live with some crazy old professor, and so it's always kids. Sort of venturing off by themselves and having. Luke Skywalker is is an orphan. So that's a big. And the first question was.
So after doing this book, what resonates with you? Do you have many favorites, or is there one that?
Yeah, well, almost every. Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff. Yeah, I mean, that was the other nice thing about doing this book, because I mostly only wrote about stuff that I liked. I loved. Well, I mean, Charlotte's Web, I think, is pretty much a perfect novel, and I think it's rich and complicated. I think adults can profit from reading it. My wife is a novelist. Her name is Helen Schulman, and she teaches MFA students in New York, and she sometimes actually teaches Charlotte's Web for structure because it's so beautifully structured. I forget the exact. I mean, it's the opening sentence. It's just like, where's Paul going with that act? I can't even get anywhere near Charlotte's Web without choking up. But it's right there in the beginning, right? Where's he going with the axe? Okay, this is a story about life and death. It's like it's a brilliant opening. And it was when he actually came to the story of, which I talk about a little bit in this, and there's a great biography of White, and there's also a great book about writing Charlotte's Web that goes into this much more detail. But he kind of added Fern and that whole beginning at the last minute. Originally, his manuscript was all just about the animals in the barn, and then he wasn't happy with it, and he put it aside, I think, for like 9 months or something, and that's how he got the idea of kind of using Fern. But it's interesting because then she kind of disappears halfway through the book. But to me, that's one of the brilliant things about it is that she grows up and goes on, which is partly, I think, part of the. I can't talk about Charlotte's Web. Partly the meaning, that's part of the meaning of the book, because it's not just about, it's about friendship and how you should live your life, and the circle of life, which now sounds like a cliche, but I don't know. So that never fails. Yeah, Charlotte's Web never fails.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? Ramesh, you have a question. Oh, sorry, you have a real. Oh, okay, sorry. I'm like calling people out, but a real question.
When my son was sort of older, elementary school and middle school, and I'd go to the library looking for books for him, it seemed like most of the protagonists were girls, and there just didn't seem to be as much literature where the heroes were, or the subjects were boys. Do you know if that's true, or are more writers of this genre female? And
well, that's a really good question. I don't know. You might have a better. I don't know. Statistically, I suspect maybe. I know. Traditionally, women's publishing, a lot of the editors were women, and it was sort of, it was an area of publishing that was more open to women. I'm guessing maybe in Margaret Wise Brown's day, it was maybe easier to get published in a juvenile, as they called it, than adult. But yeah, that I don't know. It is interesting. There's, it touches on a lot of things. There's the traditional, and this goes back, it's a current thing that people worry that boys don't read enough, and it's hard to get boys to read. And I know, you're nodding. The educator is not. The teacher is nodding her head. Yeah, and that goes back decades. I was reading stuff about, Dr. Seuss, who wrote, The Cat in the Hat in the 1950s as a kind of antidote to the Dick and Jane books, and people back then were talking about boys don't read enough, and and it's interesting. A lot of the, Lucy Pevensey and Dorothy Gale, those great female, Alice and Alice in Wonderland. All these sort of iconic girl characters. Many of them were written by men. I don't know, that's actually, and I talk about this a little bit too. Beverly Cleary, whose first book was Henry Huggins. She partly wrote that because she had been a children's librarian, and the boys she knew were always complaining that there weren't books about boys like them. I guess there was books about girls, and maybe there, boys. There was stuff like Treasure Island or, adventure things, but there weren't just kind of books about normal boys having kind of normal boy adventures. And she wrote Henry Huggins specifically to fill that niche. Although I forget the question about books. The other all-time masterpiece to me is Ramona the Pest. I think that's Beverly Cleary's greatest book, and it's a brilliant portrait of a kid and a social world. And but yeah, so I don't know. I didn't really answer your question, but it's a good one, and it's something I know that people spend a lot more time than I do thinking about this, have grappled with. Ramesh, now your question.
Well, why don't you go to the other side?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
All right, looking back at some of the works you've reread as an adult, did you come across any works that you loved as a child, but now you're reading them, you would not want your kids to read? For example, I read C.S. Lewis's Narnia books again, and looking back, I would not want if I had kids, a child to read like perhaps The Last Battle, because you see them depicting C.S. Lewis as a racist, calling the colormans like darkies, and like also Susan Paris. She's excluded from heaven because she's becoming a teenager. She likes boys, And if you know the ending, all the kids died in a tragic in a train accident except for Susan, and that's like, I can't remember read that. I think it's a good thing commit suicide, you go to heaven or something like that. And he works like they stick out. You not want your kids to read because it's
Well,
something
yeah, I mean,
it's really
I
bad.
mean, again, that sort of, yeah, I mean, there are definitely parts of Lewis. Yeah, I mean, there's these sort of characters who are, yeah, sort of, I guess, it's never sort of explicit, but yeah, they seem to be kind of modeled on sort of Middle Eastern culture.
Yeah,
talking
Muslims,
about,
like Muslim turbans,
they
yeah,
kinda-
like
yeah,
that, darkies.
They literally, they smell like garlic.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's, that I think there's stuff like that, families and teachers have to sort of decide for themselves how to handle stuff. And yeah, I don't know. The Last Battle is so bizarre. I mean, I don't know. I love the Narnia books, but I think there is a sense of diminishing returns, and by The Last Battle, it's so. I think what's interesting about those books is Christian allegories. They're very strange and organic and personal. I actually that was something that was an interesting evolution for me because I loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when I was a kid, and I read all the books. And I encountered it again in high school in some kid lit class, and suddenly I was like, oh my God, this is like a paint by numbers Christian allegory. I felt like it was kind of some kind of propaganda or something. I'm not don't happen to be a person of faith, but then when I reread The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe again, I was actually very moved by it, not in a theological way, but just as an expression of C.S. Lewis's belief, and I felt like it felt to me like it was a powerful expression of his own faith and what Christ means to him, and I was very moved. I was very moved by it. But yeah, there's diminishing returns. I mean, I'd be interested in how many kids actually make it to the end of The Last Battle, where it really gets like the stuff you're talking about, where it really gets problematic.
Yeah.
I had a problem. I mean, another one that I loved when I was a kid. I talked a little bit about it in this was Curious George. But yeah, it's funny as an adult. And my kids liked it too. But as an adult, I just found it kind of, So and then he does this, and then he does. There's not really a story. It's all. I forget what's the genre. There's a genre. There's a literary lit crit term for that kind of book. Just sort of. It's just kind of one thing, and then another, and then finally he comes back, and the images. I don't know. But then there's also this kind of weird sort of colonial overtones or undertones to those books. So that's something that when I re-encountered it was kind of like, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, like reading like Life of C.S. Lewis, I found this all great men are flawed. Reading A Grief Observed, in a sense, where he almost loses faith.
Well,
I think
yeah. I mean, there's people probably know there's a big issue now with some of Dr. Seuss's books, and
Yeah.
he also did. He was a cartoonist during, during War II, and did a lot of cartoons with kind of horrible racist characters of Japanese and stuff, which are horrible. But also, it's a little bit also. I mean, the problem wasn't just people starting to say, oh my God, Dr. Seuss. People look at that outside of the context. The problem was that there was a whole problem in American culture. It wasn't just like. I think sometimes people think, oh, Dr. Seuss was this horrible guy, but there wasn't all, I'm sort of digressing here. But I think it's just important to look at these things in context. Again, people have to decide for themselves.
Can I ask you a sort of a tangent question? Would you favor releasing the Disney classic Song of the South to public on a DVD? It's not really available because of people think it's stereotype African Americans and slavery.
Well, yeah, it does. I saw it years ago, in a theater when you could still see it. Yeah, it's horrible. I don't really believe in censoring art.
Yeah,
but I understand Disney's corporate reasons for not wanting to wanting to sort of put a lid on that. And I certainly wouldn't just if somebody had a copy of it, I wouldn't, just throw it on the DVD for a little kid. But I think, it's important to understand where our culture comes from, and to celebrate. We want to celebrate what's been great in our culture and what's great in our kids' lit. But yeah, I don't think we should just, turn a blind eye to,
Yeah, but I would generally agree with Roger Ebert's quote, like this thing. He believes the Song of the South, it should not be released probably because little kids may take the film seriously, stereotype African Americans. If I was a child, I'd be stereotyping African Americans perhaps concept of slavery and being subordinate to Caucasians. But he thinks it should be made available to film scholars to review and analyze how American society has evolved over the years, perhaps for the better.
I mean, I'm no Leni Riefenstahl fan, but I'm glad, you know, I mean, glad the Triumph of the Will can be seen if somebody
Yeah.
wants to. It's actually really boring though. I don't know if who's ever seen it? It's not. It's like the last. Yeah, maybe that's a good thing about all this stuff. It's like the last battle. Nobody's. I don't know. If anybody gets all the way through Triumph of the Will, you know, there's stronger stuff than I am. Yes.
So
Ramesh,
Rich,
finally, the question.
Yeah, well, yes, I've had a lot of time to think about it. I've actually jettisoned a few of the ones I was
sorry
gonna
to put you on the spot.
I just wanted to know whether you have come to any conclusions about what makes a successful children's author, and whether you came across among your favorite children's authors books that they wrote for adults that were just terrible. I mean, so are there different skills that are required to be a successful children's author versus someone who writes for adults? Or E.B. White wrote beautiful things for grown-ups too, but I imagine that's not always the case for all the people you study.
That's a good question. I mean, Roald Dahl wrote a lot of fiction for adults, and also I think journalism, which I haven't read, but I know people really like. I think, and probably if nobody, if it wasn't for the movies, nobody would be reading Ian Fleming anymore, except probably for Chitty Chitty, Bang Bang. I think though, I mean, what makes a successful children's author, I think, I mean, in the sort of broadest sense, I think is just what makes a successful author. Period. I mean, one thing that was interesting to me, and I kind of didn't really even think about it till I was sort of done with the book and kind of writing the afterword, is how many of these authors were childless. Obviously, a lot of children's authors do have children, and a lot of stories like the Pooh stories, famously come out of stories that people told their parents. But Dr. Seuss didn't have kids. Maurice Sendak didn't have kids. Margaret Wise Brown never had kids. Larry Ingalls Wilder had a daughter, but they had a crazy, messed up relationship. C.S. Lewis didn't have kids. But I think what was interesting about all these people is, really the only thing that made the only reason even to remark that a lot of these authors didn't have kids was it made me kind of real. It crystallized something for me in the sense that I think these people were all writing books that they needed to write, and for whatever reason, the medium of children's books, whether chapter books or picture books or whatever, that's just somehow where they were able to sort of most truly and best sort of express whatever their sort of creative urges were. I mean, some of them also, the other thing is a lot of them, like Dr. Seuss, Laura Ingalls Wilder, a lot of them came, pretty late to writing children's books. They tried other things. Margaret Wise Brown actually studied, children's writing. She's the one person I think I read about who actually studied to be a children's writer. But she spent her whole life wanting to write for adults, but for whatever reason, writing for kids is just what came to her. And I think what it says to me is it's just that these people are artists, right? And they're expressing something important, something that they need to say, and it just happens to be in the medium of children's books. But I think in the same way that somebody else finds their way into film, or somebody else finds their way into composing, or playing the saxophone or whatever. I think I think the best children's literature endures because it has some necessity behind it. I think it's not. I mean, people write, and all these people, all the authors I'm talking about, any authors, people are conscious of a market and stuff, and it's not just like somebody's going off on a hilltop and sending down the Runaway Bunny or something. But I think again, it's just this is, they're artists like anybody else, and that's what they found. That just happened to be. Kids' books just happen to be their thing, just to me the fact that so many weren't actually writing for kids that they knew, and some of them didn't even like kids that much. Dr. Seuss, I think, kind of liked the attention he got from them, but I think one-on-one he had a hard time. Margaret Wise Brown famously said, to write for children, you don't have to like children, you have to like what children like, which she did. And I think a lot of these people too. That's just that was something, something about their personalities. Sendak and Seuss always said they wrote for themselves, and I think, I think there's a little bit of coyness in that, but I think there's more truth in it. Well, should I shut up now? Or? I'm happy to keep going. If
I
oh yeah,
wasn't-
sorry, I'm sorry.
No, it's
oh, I'm
okay.
sorry.
I just snuck up here.
Yeah.
So one thing you haven't talked about so much is illustrations
Yeah, I
used
know.
in children's books. Can you just briefly talk about that? And do you ever believe that, you know, we might overuse illustrations in a way that it prevents imagination or kind of prohibits the individual from, you know, imagining the story a little bit more than?
Well, you know, that's a funny question. I've actually been thinking about that recently because I just started. I don't know. I guess after reading a lot of picture books and when I was done with this book, I was just sort of I really love Charles Dickens, but I hadn't read him in like, I don't know, 20 years, and it was like, oh, Bleak House. That's one. You know, that's one of the ones that everybody likes, and I've never read it. So I started Bleak, and like, I don't know, 300 pages into it or something. But yeah, it has illustrations, and I found like they were sort of irritating me because it was kind of like they felt like they were too literal. But on the other hand, I can't imagine like the Oz books or the, you know, or the, you know, Beverly Cleary books without their original illustrations. I just love those so much. I don't know. We have a real kid here.
Yeah.
Do you like do you like books when you have like a chapter book? Do you like having illustrations, or does it bug you? You don't like them bug you, but if they're colors. Oh. Oh, thanks. Oh, good.
So, I mean, picture books, especially with illustrations, the words and the illustrations can both enhance and work off each other and tell different stories and really sort of add to each other. So I'm an
Yeah.
advocate for
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
especially in picture books.
yeah. Well, yeah. Especially picture. I mean, I talk about this, you know, a little bit in the book, and probably I could have and should have talked about it more. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, I think especially. I mean, yeah. Sort of illustrations of chapter book are another thing, and often wonderful if they're in color. Not, you know. But yeah, picture books. I mean, I think are really an underappreciated art form. Where'd my? Oh, there you are. Yeah. Sorry, I was just kind of like, oh, you don't have to stand up. I just was looking. I just wanted to make sure I was addressed. But you know.
I wanted to say my family, they're all artists. So
Oh,
I
okay.
don't want to say I'm pro
Yeah.
illustration. I don't want to seem like I'm not. I just wanted to pose
Yeah.
that.
Are they? Do you or any of your family illustrate books for children or different kinds of stuff?
Well, my brother did comic books when he was
Oh.
younger, and they were actually posted in the Denver Post
Oh,
when
cool.
we were younger. But no, as an adult,
Yeah.
he doesn't.
Well, that was the thing. I mean, because I think, you know, I think picture books in some ways are really are a little bit underappreciated. I mean, it's funny because, yeah, I mean, I know, you know, comic books and comic strips and were also looked down on for a long time. I think I've sort of achieved a certain kind of, you know, cultural level of credibility, and you know, certainly graphic novels and things like that. But I think, you know, I think the best picture books are every bit as sophisticated as the best comics and graphic novels. In some ways, even more so, because they're even a more purely, you know, visual medium, and the way, you know, the way they sort of tell a, you know, visual narrative, I just think can be so sophisticated. And people just sort of, yeah, people, I think when people think of these things as being simple, they're often really, you know, really missing what's really going on in some of these books. I mean, I think it's sort of, you know, to me it's like, you know, it's maybe analogous to poetry or something. I mean, yeah, a graphic novel is a graphic novel, but I think a great picture book is really a kind of visual poetry, and should really be, and can be, I think, you know, appreciated in that way.
I actually have a question too,
Yeah.
if that's okay. So were there any books that, when you were writing about it, you found them incredibly hard to write about and still press through and came up with something, or or what other ones did you have drop away because it seemed like you have a strong connection to the book, but can't find the right way to talk about it, and which ones just automatically you were full of things to say from the start?
Well, some, yeah, there's a couple. I mean, there a couple I was full of things. I mean, for me, yeah, both The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe and you know, Where the Wild Things Are were books that I've had sort of like kind of ups and downs with over my life. So those were. I mean, really, the book really came out of an essay I wrote about Where the Wild Things Are, which I didn't like as a kid. I just thought it was kind of weird, and I didn't get it. I knew it was this sort of important book because it, you know, it had a little gold sticker on it. But I just didn't, whatever. I didn't like it, And then somebody, again, when our daughter was born, and all these nice people, and everybody should do this when you have friends who have children, give them picture books, and buy them here downstairs at Politics and Prose. I'm sure you have the Very Hungry Caterpillar in stock. There you go. Get to it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, but then, somebody gave us Where the Wild Things Are, and I was like, as an adult, and also as, the beneficiary of having been in therapy for 15 years or something, I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. This is this incredibly sort of psychologically astute kind of fairy tale, and I just thought it was so powerful in the way it's about the boy, Max, kind of dealing with his anger and conquering. So suddenly, I just saw all these things in it that had just, escaped me when I was a kid. Not that I was like, whatever, just didn't, just didn't speak to me, And, we should never feel bad when a book doesn't speak to us, because everybody can make a long list of stuff they're supposed to like that they don't. But anyways, to your question though, one book that I really loved and felt really profoundly about, and just didn't end up. I'm not even sure really. I don't know, sort of for space or just kind of the logic of the chapter. But The Bridge to Terabithia, which was also a book that came out a little bit after my time as a kid. So that was a book I only encountered as an adult, and I was reading it for my chapter on death. And I don't want to spoil it for him, but there's a death, and the main character has a very powerful reaction to this death, which I just really admired, because it was so kind of raw, and it was so it was not neat, and the book doesn't tie itself off neatly. It lets this character grieve and rage, and it kind of lets you know that this is a profound loss, and there's it's not like this horrible despairing, Charles Bukowski ending or something. There's hope and stuff, but it doesn't really it doesn't sugarcoat the experience of losing somebody you love, and I really admired that, and I was moved by it, and I just couldn't, I don't know, just couldn't work it into the book. There was some other. I read all the Golden Compass books too, because I was going to kind of write about them in opposition to the Narnia books, but then I ended up, by the end they just got so nutty. I don't even want to parse this. It's just like, it's like. So I think I talk about it in a footnote or something. But I don't know. I kind of admired those as kind of a work of imagination, but at some point they completely lost me as a reader. That answer your question? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody.